The fall of the Queen in the sky was red with fire. Smoke rose from the battlefield like a living thing, twisting and curling as if mocking the fallen. Screams echoed in the distance, mixed with the roar of alien war machines, and there, in the center of the chaos, lay the warrior queen. Her armor was cracked, her once glorious battle crest broken. Her left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood soaked the ground beneath her. She tried to rise, her hands clawing at the mud, but her strength betrayed her. The enemy's victory drums were growing louder. The sound of boots and mechanical steps was closing in. Her army was gone, dead, captured, or scattered into the wind. The battlefield that had once been her stage of triumph was now her prison. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out even in defeat. She would not show weakness, not to her enemies, and certainly not to him. Somewhere in the smoke, she thought she saw movement, a figure stepping closer, chains clinking with every step. She narrowed her eyes, and then recognition struck. It was the human slave, the one she had insulted, humiliated, and beaten in front of her court only days ago. The one she had called a weak creature, fit only to clean her boots. And now he was walking toward her with a look she could not read. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her broken body. She expected him to laugh or turn away. Instead, he crouched down, his voice calm but cold. "If I help you, you will owe me." Her pride burned hotter than her wounds. She spat into the dirt at his feet, her eyes filled with fire. "I owe nothing to a slave," she hissed. He didn't argue, he didn't even look angry. Instead, he slipped his arms under her and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her body protested, pain shooting through every bone. But she was too stunned to fight him. Arrows whistled past them. Laser bolts scorched the air. The human ran, his chains rattling as he carried her away from the battlefield. Every step he took was heavy, his breath harsh, but he did not slow. Behind them, enemy raiders shouted, their voices eager for the Queen's death. She could hear the engines of hoverbikes growling closer. The human darted into the cover of broken walls and shattered towers. He moved like a predator, swift and sure. At one point, he slammed his back against a half-collapsed wall, hiding them in the shadows until the raiders passed. She could feel his heartbeat under the armor scraps strapped to his chest. It was steady, not frantic, the rhythm of someone who had faced death before and learned not to fear it. She hated that. She hated that he was the one keeping her alive. But she hated more the thought of dying in the dirt. Forgotten when the path ahead cleared, he started moving again. They crossed over bodies, some friend, some foe, the stench of death thick in the air. The Queen clenched her jaw, refusing to let the memories of those faces weaken her. The human's grip on her tightened whenever her body shifted. Once, when she winced, he slowed just enough to adjust her weight so the pain eased. He didn't say a word, and neither did she. They reached the edge of the battlefield as the sun dipped behind the hills. The light turned blood-red, shadows stretching long across the cracked earth. In the distance, she could see the scorched banners of her kingdom lying in the dust. Her reign, the reign she had fought for, killed for, felt like it was slipping away with each step. Her mind screamed at her to push him away, to crawl on her own, to keep her pride intact. But her body knew the truth. Without him, she would not survive the night. As darkness fell, the air grew colder. The human stopped at the mouth of a narrow canyon. He set her down gently against a rock, then crouched low to scan the horizon. His eyes moved constantly, searching for movement. She studied him for the first time, really studied him. He was taller than most of her warriors. His frame solid with lean muscle, scars ran down his arms and neck, each one a story she had never cared to hear. His hands were rough but precise as he checked the straps on his makeshift armor. There was no fear in him, no hesitation, just the quiet, focused will to survive. Why? She asked suddenly, her voice low but sharp. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You could have left me there." She said. "I could have," he replied, then turned his gaze back to the horizon. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Not gratitude, not anger, something else she couldn't place. The night wind howled through the canyon, carrying the distant echoes of battle. The Queen closed her eyes for just a moment when she opened them. The human was still standing guard, his shadow long and silent under the alien moon. And for the first time in her life, the warrior queen felt the uneasy weight of a debt she could never repay. The escape through the wastes the night was colder than the queen had expected. The wind hissed through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of rust, ash, and something far older, the smell of the wastes. The human lifted her again without a word, his chains clinking softly in the darkness. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, unshaken by the danger that still lurked behind them. Every few steps she glanced back, half expecting to see the glint of enemy weapons in the moonlight. But there was only shadow and silence. For now, they moved through narrow rock passages that twisted like the ribs of some ancient beast. The ground was uneven, scattered with jagged stones that tore at the human's bare feet. Yet he never stumbled. The queen found herself watching the way he moved, like a predator avoiding traps, each step deliberate. It was the walk of someone who had been hunted before. When the path widened, they emerged into the open wastes. Here, the air was dry and biting, the land stretched endless and empty, broken only by skeletal remains of machines long dead in the far distance. Faint lights moved, raider patrols searching for them. The queen's pride told her to demand he'd take a different route. But her instincts told her not to make a sound. Hours passed in silence. The human carried her as if she weighed nothing, though she could feel the muscles in his arms tense and release with each step. The moon climbed high, throwing pale light. Across the wastes, shadows stretched long across the cracked earth. A faint vibration reached her ears, the low hum of hover bikes. She tensed, her hand reaching for a weapon she no longer had. The human stopped, tilting his head, without a word. He turned toward a collapsed warship half buried in the sand. He slipped inside, the metal groaning under his weight. The darkness swallowed them. They crouched low, listening. Engines roared closer. Then past the hunters moving toward the battlefield they had escaped. When the noise faded, he set her down for the first time in hours. Her leg throbbed, sending sharp pain up her side. He tore a strip from the tattered fabric around his wrists and rewrapped the bandages on her wounds. His hands were quick but careful, his touch firm but never cruel. She studied his face, lit by the faint silver of the moon through a hole in the ship's hull. There was a scar running from his jaw to his temple. She realized she had never noticed it before, perhaps because she had never cared to look. "What is your name?" she asked without thinking. He didn't look up. "Doesn't matter," he said simply. The answer bothered her more than she expected. When they left the wreck, the air had grown sharper. They moved again, this time slower. The ground littered with shards of glass and twisted metal. In the distance, a pack of desert scavenger beasts moved like shadows across the sand. Their glowing eyes watching, the queen felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The human noticed them too, but his pace didn't falter. When the beasts drew closer, he adjusted his hold on her, freeing one arm to pull a jagged blade from his belt. The scavengers circled, hissing. The largest lunged. The human sidestepped and drove the blade into its side, pulling it free before the beast hit the ground. The others retreated into the dark, their growls fading. The queen found herself gripping his shoulder, not in fear, but in something else she didn't want to name. By dawn, the horizon burned with the light of two suns rising together. The human led them toward a rusted watchtower leaning against the wind. Inside, they found a water tank cracked. Open but still holding enough to drink, he lifted her so she could reach it, letting her sip slowly. Her pride wanted her to refuse his help, but her body was too dry when they had drunk their fill. He searched the shelves, finding a small pack of dried ration strips. He handed her half, keeping the rest for himself. The queen hesitated, staring. At the rough food in her hand, no one had ever eaten with her like this, as an equal. Without bowing or waiting for permission, for some reason she didn't hate it. The rest of the day was harder. The heat beat down on them, and the human's breathing grew heavier. Still, he didn't slow, once. She told him to put her down so she could try to walk. He stopped, looked at her injured leg, and shook his head. "You'd last 20 steps," he said. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right, as the suns lowered again. Painting the wastes in gold and blood, they reached the mouth of an ancient war bunker half buried in the sand. He pushed open the rusted hatch with his shoulder, carrying her inside. The air smelled stale. But it was safe, for now. He set her down on an old supply crate. She watched him as he began stacking debris against the hatch, sealing them in for the night. Every movement was precise, no wasted motion, when he finally sat across from her. Resting his back against the wall, his head tilted back, eyes half closed. She realized something she hadn't before. This man, this human slave she had despised, was not just carrying her, he was keeping her alive. Step by step, breath by breath, and for the first time in her life, the warrior queen felt the thin, strange thread of trust begin to form. The wound and the truth: the bunker was cold, the walls were thick with dust, and the air carried the heavy scent of metal and forgotten battles. The queen sat on the supply crate, her injured leg stretched out before her. The human was crouched beside her, peeling away the blood-soaked bandages from the night before. She bit down on her pride and stayed silent. Though every pull of the cloth sent fire up her side, his hands were steady, his movements quick but careful. From a pouch at his belt, he pulled out a small container. It was dented and scratched, but inside was a thick salve that smelled faintly of herbs. She narrowed her eyes. "That's not from my army," she said quietly. "No," he replied, without looking up. Then, where she began, but stopped when he pressed the salve to her wound. The sting made her gasp. "Old traitors," he said simply. "I kept it hidden." For myself, she didn't know why. But the idea that he had saved this medicine for his own survival and was now using it on her made something twist in her chest. When he finished wrapping the fresh bandages, he stood and moved to the hatch. Pressing his ear against it, no sound outside, no rumble of engines, no shouts. He returned to the far wall and sat, resting one knee up and letting his arms hang loosely over it. The queen watched him, her sharp eyes tracing the scars that crossed his arms and shoulders. She wondered how many of those had come from her people. "How long have you been a slave?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pack, pulled out a ration strip, and began to chew. It irritated her, not his eating, but the way he ignored her question. "I asked you something," she said firmly. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Long enough," he said finally, his voice flat. Her jaw tightened, and before that, she pressed. He gave a small shake of his head, as if brushing away a memory he didn't want to touch. "I was free," he said, "and it didn't last." The queen felt an unexpected pang of curiosity, but she pushed it down, reminding herself who she was and who he was. The hours passed slowly in the bunker. The only sounds were the occasional groan of metal and the faint whistle of wind through the cracks. The queen shifted uncomfortably, the ache in her leg growing sharper. She hated this feeling, helpless, unable to stand, unable to fight. Her mind wandered to the days when her presence on the battlefield was enough to make enemies retreat. Now she was hidden away in the dark, protected by a man she once thought beneath her. In the middle of the night, she woke suddenly. A faint, scratching sound echoed through the bunker. She looked toward the hatch. But the noise came from the other side of the room, from a small ventilation shaft. Before she could speak, the human was already moving, silent as shadow. He pulled a jagged piece of metal from the floor and waited by the shaft. The sound grew louder, claws scraping metal. Then, with a sudden lunge, a scavenger beast's head burst through, its teeth snapping. The human drove the metal shard deep into its throat before it could climb through. The creature fell back into the darkness outside, its body thudding against the sand. The queen realized her heart was pounding, not because of the attack, but because she had felt genuine fear for him in that moment. He sat back down, breathing a little heavier, but not speaking. She found herself breaking the silence. "You could have let it in. It would have gone for me first," she said. He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "I'm not like you," he said simply. The words struck harder than she expected, not because they were an insult, but because they were true. She remembered the countless times she had ordered lives to be thrown away in the name of victory, the cold calculations she had made without a second thought. And here was a man, a slave, who risked himself for someone who had given him nothing but cruelty. It made no sense, and yet, in the heavy quiet of the bunker, she couldn't stop thinking about it. When dawn came, pale light slipping through the cracks, the human prepared to move again. He offered her water first, then adjusted his grip to lift her onto his back. This time, she didn't protest. As he carried her toward the wasteland beyond the bunker, she kept her eyes on the horizon. But in her mind, the question kept repeating, why? Why would he do this for me? The hunt in the ruins rose from the desert like the bones of a dead giant. Blackened towers leaned at broken angles, their edges jagged against the pale sky. Wind howled through hollow streets, carrying the smell of dust and rust. The human moved carefully, his boots crunching over shattered glass and old bones. On his back, the queen clung to him, her good hand gripping the strap across his chest. Her injured leg throbbed with each step, but she bit back any sound. The city had once been a thriving trade hub. She remembered hearing stories of it in her youth. Now it was nothing but a graveyard, its silence broken only by the moan of metal and the distant call of scavenger birds. The human paused at an intersection where two streets met, scanning the shadows. She followed his gaze and spotted movement, low, slinking shapes keeping pace with them. Predators, they had been watching since they entered the ruins. She felt her pride flare. "I can fight," she whispered. He didn't slow. "Not yet," he replied, his voice calm. They kept moving, weaving between crumbling walls and collapsed bridges. Every step deeper into the city felt like a step into a trap. The queen's eyes darted to the shadows again. The shapes were closer now. She recognized them, feral stalkers, creatures that thrived on the weak and wounded. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. The human stopped in front of a fallen tower. Its base was cracked open, revealing the dark shell of what had once been a market hall. He stepped inside. The dust thickened the air. Rows of rusted shelves stood like skeletal trees, some still holding scraps of old supplies. He set the queen down on a high piece of rubble, out of direct sight from the doorway. "Stay here," he said. Before she could protest, he moved deeper into the hall, searching the shelves for anything useful. The queen kept her eyes on the doorway. The stalkers' shapes flickered past, shadows against the light. Her instincts screamed danger. One moment the street was empty, the next, a beast lunged through the opening, its claws scraping the stone. The queen grabbed the nearest thing, a broken metal rod, and swung with all her strength. The rod connected with the beast's head, making it stumble back with a snarl. It lunged again, but this time the human was there. His blade flashed, cutting across its neck in one swift motion. The creature collapsed at his feet, its blood pooling dark across the dust. She was breathing hard, her grip on the rod still tight. "You draw them in when you make noise," he said, not unkindly. "Then stop leaving me alone," she shot back. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension thick. Then he turned away, dragging the beast's body out of the doorway, leaving a smear across the floor. The rest of the day was spent moving from building to building. The human scavenged what he could: a half-full canteen, a strip of dried meat, a few pieces of wire. The Queen noticed how he always checked the shadows before stepping inside any place. He never rushed, never let his guard drop, and yet the predators still followed. By sunset, the glow of their eyes was everywhere, lurking just beyond the last line of broken walls. When they stopped to rest in what remained of an old watch station, the Queen couldn't help but speak. "They're hunting you," she said. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "No," he replied, "they're hunting you." Her pride bristled. "I am not prey," she said sharply. "You are when you can't walk," he answered without hesitation. She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. Night fell quickly. The ruins became a maze of shadows and strange echoes. They made camp in the highest room of the station, the doorway blocked with debris. The human sat near the window, watching the streets below. The Queen shifted on the dusty floor, her gaze drifting to his back. Every time she looked at him now, the image of him stepping in front of the beast flashed in her mind. It unsettled her, not because she feared him, but because she didn't understand him. In the middle of the night, a distant howl split the silence. It was answered by another, closer. The human tightened his grip on his blade. The Queen reached for the broken rod she had kept from earlier. For a long while they waited in the dark. No beasts came. Only the sound of the wind filled the air again. As the first light of dawn crept across the ruins, the human looked back at her. "We move now," he said. She nodded, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner being carried. She felt like a soldier moving with another soldier. The thoughts stayed with her as they left the station, their shadows stretching long over the bones of the dead city. The enemy returns. The morning light had barely touched the ruins when the sound came. A low, distant growl of vengeance. The human froze mid-step, his head tilting to the side. The Queen heard it too, the unmistakable whine of hoverbikes, the same sound that had chased them from the battlefield. Her heart tightened. "They found us," she whispered. He didn't answer, but his pace quickened, his boots crunching over broken stone. They moved through a narrow alley where crumbling walls leaned inward. The light above was thin, slicing through the dust in silver lines. The human carried her faster now, every step deliberate behind them. The sound grew louder. Engines snarled. Voices shouted in the alien tongue of the raiders. The Queen's sharp ears caught one word repeated again and again: her name. They weren't just hunting for survivors. They wanted her. The human ducked into the hollow shell of an old building. Once it might have been a shop. Now its walls were half collapsed, shelves empty and rotting. He set her down behind a toppled counter, his eyes scanning the street through a hole in the wall. "They'll search every building," he murmured. She gritted her teeth. "If you run, they might let you live," she said. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I told you before," he replied. "I'm not like you." The first hoverbike roared past outside, its shadow sliding across the dusty floor. A second followed, slower, scanning with a mounted light that sliced through the gaps in the walls. The Queen held her breath, her hand tightening on the broken rod she still carried. The human's grip on his blade was steady. Another bike passed, then stopped. The engine idled just outside. Footsteps crunched on the ground. Heavy boots moving toward the doorway. A raider appeared, tall and armored in scavenged plates. Its mask was dented, the lenses glowing red. It stepped inside, its weapons sweeping the shadows. The Queen's muscles tensed. She was ready to strike if it came closer. But the human moved first. He rose from the darkness behind a pillar and drove his blade up beneath the raider's chest plate. The alien staggered, choking, before collapsing. Silently to the floor, the human dragged the body aside, but the noise had been enough. Shouts erupted outside, the engines revving higher. "They know we're here," the Queen said. "I know," he replied, already lifting her again. They burst out through the back of the building, weaving through side streets as the sound of pursuit grew. Bolts of plasma fire hissed past them, scorching the stone. One struck a wall near the Queen's head, showering her with dust. The human didn't flinch. He ran, his breath steady despite the weight he carried. They reached an open plaza where the ground was cracked and uneven. Hoverbikes sped in from both sides, trying to cut them off. The human set her down behind a broken statue. "Stay here," he said, before she could argue. He stepped into the open. The raiders jeered, their engines roaring as they circled him. One of them called out in a mocking tone. The Queen recognized the words. They were offering him freedom in exchange for her. She waited for his answer. He didn't speak. Instead, he lunged at the nearest bike, yanking the rider off and slamming him into the ground. The others attacked at once, weapons flashing from behind the statue. The Queen could only watch as he moved. Every strike was precise, every dodge just close enough to avoid the blade or bolt. But there were too many. A raider caught him in the side with a jagged spear, and he staggered her. Heart lurched without thinking. She pulled herself up onto the statue's base. Using the rod as a staff for balance, she aimed at the nearest raider and hurled a chunk of broken stone. It struck the rider in the head, knocking him sideways. The human took the opening and brought him down. Now they fought together, him in the open, her from cover. She used the rod to knock weapons aside or jab at riders who came too close. It wasn't graceful, but it was enough. One by one, the raiders fell or fled, their engines fading into the distance. When the last was gone, the plaza was silent except for their breathing. The human leaned heavily on his blade, blood soaking his side. The Queen forced herself to limp toward him. He looked at her. And for the first time since they met, there was no wall between their eyes. "You're hurt," she said, her voice softer than she expected. "So are you," he replied. She reached out, steadying him as he swayed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the empty plaza, carrying away the smell of blood and burnt metal. The Queen realized something strange. She didn't feel humiliated by helping him stand. She felt right. It was a feeling she couldn't name. But it stayed with her as they left the plaza, walking side by side through the ruins. The choice of the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the broken city. The human steps were slower now, his breath heavier. The wound in his side bled through the rough bandage he had wrapped earlier. Yet he still carried the Queen without complaint, his arms steady. She could feel the warmth of his blood against her. Every drop that fell felt like a silent warning. He was giving more of himself than his body could spare. They left the ruins behind and stepped onto the open sands. The Queen looked back at the city's jagged skyline, knowing the raiders might return. The desert stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving. She glanced at him. "You're bleeding too much," she said. "I bled more." He replied without slowing. "That's not an answer." She muttered. He didn't respond. But she noticed the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. As night fell, they found shelter beneath a massive outcrop of stone. The wind hissed over the rock like whispers in a foreign tongue. He set her down gently, then sank to his knees. His hand pressed to his side. For the first time, he looked unsteady, without thinking. The queen crawled closer. "Let me see it," she said. He shook his head. "Save your strength," he murmured. I said, "Let me see it." Her voice hardened. Reluctantly, he pulled aside the torn fabric, revealing an ugly, jagged wound, deeper than she'd thought. Blood seeped steadily, dark against his skin. She tore a strip from her own cloak. "You waste your time," he said. "Be quiet," she snapped. Her hands were not as gentle as his had been with her, but they were steady. She cleaned the wound with the last of their water. The hiss of pain he made was brief, quickly swallowed when she tied the makeshift bandage tight. She looked him in the eye. "You keep me alive," she said. "Now I keep you alive." He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words, then gave a small nod. The night grew colder. They sat close to share warmth, the flicker of their small fire casting shadows. On the stone, for a long time, neither spoke. Then, in the quiet, she asked the question that had haunted her since the battlefield. "Why didn't you leave me?" He poked at the fire with a stick, his gaze fixed on the embers. "I've been left before," he said simply. She waited, but he didn't say more. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was enough to make her chest feel heavier. The next morning, the wind carried a different sound, faint, rhythmic, marching. The queen tensed. The human heard it too. They climbed to the top of the stone outcrop to see. Far across the sands, a small group of armed scouts was moving. In their direction, the queen recognized the banners, her own kingdom's colors. But her relief was short-lived. Those scouts were not loyal to her anymore. They served the general who had betrayed her, the one who had left her on the battlefield to die. The human glanced at her. "Your people," he said. "My enemies," she corrected. He shifted his grip on his blade. "I can fight them," he offered. She hesitated. They were too many for one wounded man to face. If they captured her, she might survive, but only as a prisoner, a trophy to be paraded before the court. If he fought them, he would almost certainly die. She realized then that she had a choice, a real choice. She could tell him to leave her, to save himself, or she could keep him with her. Knowing it might cost him his life, the scouts drew closer, their voices carrying over the sand. The queen's heart pounded. She thought of all the times she had seen life as nothing more than a tool. She thought of how many soldiers she had thrown away without a second thought. And then she thought of this man, this human slave who had carried her through fire and ruin without asking for anything in return. Her decision came quietly, without the weight of her old pride. "We move," she said. He nodded, lifting her again without question. They slipped down the far side of the outcrop. Keeping to the low ground, every step took them farther from her people and deeper into uncertainty. The human didn't ask where they were going, he just carried her. And for the first time, she wasn't thinking about her throne or her pride. She was thinking about him, the man who had given her a life she didn't think she deserved. And the strange, unshakable truth that she no longer wanted to face the future without him. As the suns dipped toward the horizon again, the queen looked back one last time. The scouts were small shapes now, disappearing into the distance. Her past was behind her. Her choice had been made, and whatever came next, she would face it not as a ruler with a servant, but as a woman walking beside the man who had saved her. A queen's death, the desert finally broke into rolling green hills. After days of endless sand and heat, the sight of grass felt unreal. The air was cooler here. Touched with the scent of rain from far-off storms, the human carried the queen up a narrow ridge, each step steady despite the fading strength in his limbs. She could feel the strain in his breathing. Yet he never complained when they reached the top. The queen saw it, the tall spires of her capital in the distance. For a long moment, she said nothing. Home. A place she had ruled with iron will. A place where she had once thought herself untouchable. Now, she approached it not as the unbroken queen, but as a crippled survivor carried by a man she had once despised. They moved down the ridge into a valley where small farming villages lay scattered. Word of her survival traveled faster than she expected by the time they reached the outer gates. Of the capital, a crowd had gathered, gasps and whispers rippled through them. Some knelt, some stared in disbelief. Others looked at the human with suspicion, or worse, contempt. Her guards rushed forward. Their eyes wide, they reached for her. But she raised a hand. "No," she commanded, her voice sharp. The guards froze. "This man carries me," she said. "No one touches me but him." The human's jaw tightened. But he said nothing as he carried her through the gates, inside. The marble streets felt strange beneath his worn boots. The queen could feel the weight of every stare. Nobles peering from balconies, merchants pausing in their trade, soldiers stiffening in confusion. They passed under the high arch of the palace gates. The great hall loomed ahead, its banners hanging heavy in the still air. Inside, the court gathered quickly, word of her return spreading like wildfire. She was lowered gently onto the steps of her throne. The human stepped back, his eyes scanning the room like a man expecting danger. The council bowed low, their voices trembling. They praised her survival, asked about her wounds, spoke of vengeance against her enemies. But the queen raised her hand again, silencing them. "There is something you must see," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. She turned to the human. "Kneel," she commanded. He hesitated, then obeyed. Gasps filled the hall. A slave kneeling before the throne was nothing new. But what happened next silenced the room completely. The queen leaned forward, and she knelt too. The warrior queen, feared in battle, undefeated in politics, bowed her head before a human slave. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "This man carried me from the field of death," she said. "When all others fled, when my own generals abandoned me, when my soldiers were scattered. He alone stood between me and the end." The hall was silent. "He is no slave," she continued. "From this day forward, he is protector of the throne." Shock rippled through the court. Some nobles looked outraged, others stunned into stillness. But none dared speak. The queen rose slowly, placing a hand on the human's shoulder. Her grip was firm, not as a ruler holding a servant, but as an equal standing beside another equal. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "I know," she said softly, "but I will that night." The palace celebrated her return, but the queen stayed away from the feasts. She found herself in the quiet of the palace gardens, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The human was there too, standing beneath the tall lantern trees. "You could leave now," she said, stepping toward him. "No one would stop you." He glanced at her. "And if I stayed?" he asked. Her gaze held his. "Then you would never stand alone again," she replied. The silence between them was different now, not heavy with mistrust, but steady with something unspoken. A promise, perhaps, a bond that neither battle nor pride could break. When dawn came, the queen stood on the balcony overlooking her city. The human stood beside her, no longer in chains. The wind carried the scent of the coming rains. Her throne was behind her, her people below, but her eyes were on the horizon. She knew there would be more battles, more threats, more betrayals, yet she also knew this. Whatever came, she would face it with him at her side. The warrior queen, who had once seen him as nothing, now saw him as everything she could trust. And in the quiet of that morning, she understood that the greatest victory she had ever won was not on the battlefield. It was the loyalty, the courage, and the heart of the man who had saved her life.